So let's get with it. Meyer's strategy for success. This was a year ago. Some of you may have seen this. I'd worked kind of all winter, and I'd come up with a strategy for success. And you might remember it if you've done what I told you. You did well this year. Okay, buy low, convert efficiently, and sell high. All right, that's it. That's it right there. I went to school a long time. They don't teach that at OU, by the way. And so, I mean, that obviously it's not rocket science, what you got to do to run a business successfully, but it's very challenging getting that done in this kind of a balance. The challenge, as I told you a year ago, was that the definition of what constitutes low and what constitutes high is changing. And it has changed dramatically. All of you that didn't buy corn for a year last fall said, good gosh, it's $4. It can't get any higher than this, right? Yeah, see, the definition of low and high is certainly changing. Only one high has been higher in the corn market, and that was 95 and 96. I think I lost the pointer there. 95 and 96, and we're probably going to challenge that or break it at some point this spring. Now, after yesterday and today, maybe not. I mean, if you didn't check upstairs, corn futures were down the limit today. Bean futures were down the limit. Meal was down $10 to $12. So we've had a little bit of setback here with the economic situation that's happened this week. Wheat reminded us that it's important too. We in Iowa and Minnesota and this part of the world forget about wheat sometimes, but that's the spark that lit the fire a year ago, was when South America and our southern hemisphere wheat crops came in short, and it set corn off in the fall of 2006, right at the time, just before, all of us were planning on buying corn cheap during harvest, right? And so it reminds us that wheat's there. Now, is wheat a factor now? Kinda. But it's so far priced beyond corn right now, it's got to come back a lot before it starts really having a big impact on our grain markets. The good thing about wheat, you can grow it a lot of places, and it's been planted a lot of places in the southern hemisphere this year, and there's more of it going to be planted as we go through the spring. The wheat situation could very well take care of itself depending on what weather is and crops and those kind of things, but it has to come back dramatically so to really start playing into the grain price. Higher soybean meal has exacerbated the problem we face, almost record high on soybean meal prices. And obviously, you're dealing with this every day. I'm not telling you anything new. Iowa State University's estimated cost and returns estimates the cost of raising a hog, and this is stated in dollars per hundredweight of carcass on this graph, has gone up 27% from July of 2006 until December of 2007. Okay, so more than a quarter has gone up, and challenging the highest on record back there in 95 and 96. So I said, okay, well, what do the futures mean for this? And I used these data in historical corn, Omaha corn, and Decatur soybean meal prices, and then derived a regression equation that was very good at predicting these costs because they're the main driver of the variability in the Iowa State University estimated cost of returns, and then forecast those out into the future. And there's what the futures prices on Monday gave me. Okay, those are 2 days old. They're higher than what they would be now because we've had 2 down days. But it says that hogs going to town this summer are going to have costs above $75 a hundredweight on carcass weight basis. Now, that's even beyond where the futures were last week, and as we know, hog futures have backed off some then. So, there's not really an end in sight of this thing. It's really a very difficult situation with tight stocks. And so what can you do? Well, there's not just a whole lot you can do for costs at present. If you've got corn bought, you can use the inventory you have. At some point, you're going to have to replace it, and the question is how much that's going to cost. Using DDGs, while nutritionally we can get that done, Joel, you use as much as you can, but price isn't a real bargain versus corn. This is historic, with DDGs in dollars per ton on the left and corn in dollars per bushel on the right. And you can see a pretty high correlation here. Okay, they move somewhat together. Now, one of the things we have to be careful about, though, is that the units kind of causes some trouble. So I went back and said, okay, if we took 100 pounds of DDGs and 89 pounds of corn and 9 pounds of soybean meal. Now, that's leaving out the DiCal limestone trade-off, and that does matter. But then the correlation gets tighter yet, and we can really see the trade-offs that we're dealing with. In addition, you can look at this, and there's only been a few times that DDGs were a good deal relative to corn for hogs. And for hogs is an important thing, okay? A couple of times that I see there, you can see where the fuchsia-colored line was below the blue line, some in 2006 and 7, and again this last summer. As a matter of fact, if we just state the two things on a per-pound basis as a price ratio, this is what that looks like. And for the last 2.5 years, DDG prices have been dropping relative to corn. No surprise there. So the supply of DDGs has gotten larger as we produce more ethanol. But it still hasn't dropped enough to really make it profitable to put it into hog diets. And only twice, the two red boxes in this slide, has that really been the case. And it looks like the ratio there is about DDGs as 92% the price of corn on a pound-for-pound basis. Then it's worth using DDGs and you putting in the soybean meal to do it. And that's only happened a couple of times. Now, we're back close to that just recently. Joel, I think you mentioned that. Just in recent weeks, we're kind of back close to that. So it could be a good thing for you to use up to the extent nutritionally it works. But if we're going to hang our hat on DDGs in the hog business, that's probably going to be a hat we're not going to wear very much because it just isn't going to work. And the reason, number one reason, is it's better cattle feed. So if it gets cheap enough to use it relative to corn on the hog side, cattle feeders, dairy, even cow-calf operations are going to bid it away from you, and all of a sudden it won't be cheap enough again. So I don't think that's going to be an answer. It certainly might be in the short term, and you need to keep an eye on that. But again, you have some limitations from a flowability and a nutritional standpoint, and the KSU website really does a good job. Jerry Sherson's website at the University of Minnesota does a good job of telling you how you can go about using that. Other alternatives, there's a little problem with those. They all get priced off corn. Okay? So if you were using bakery byproducts, lo and behold, they went up as the price of corn went up. And it's just the way markets work. In addition, there's not just a big pile of unused feed ingredients out here that now that corn's high, you can go buy those. Somebody was using them before. And so all the alternatives go up with corn. I wish I had a better message for you, but I don't. Now, this couldn't get any worse, could it? Wrong. It could get worse. And the reason I put this up here is to let you know that, there are still some things you can do to put lids on feed prices. Now, will the lid be as low as it was last December? No. But you still may need a lid. I just laid out a scenario here, and this is the actual 2005 and 6, 2006 and 7, and then 2007, 8, as USDA published it in December and again in January. And you might remember in January, they increased exports a little bit. They played around with some numbers. They reduced the yield, reduce the crop, reduce the carry out some, and set these grain markets off on another leg upward. All right? Here's 2008 and 9, and this is not really an estimate from Paragon Economics. It's really just an exercise. But I said if we plant 87 million acres of corn, and by the way, that's a high number relative to what I've heard on the potential plantings. I've heard as low as 85, so we won't even go there. 87. We harvest the normal percentage of it. We'd get about 80 million acres harvested. We have a 151.9. That's the longer-term trend, and we'll talk about which trend do you want to live by here in a minute. We have 1.438 billion carried in from this year. We have a crop of 12.092, given the numbers above. We import about 15 million bushels a year. And, John, that is probably seed, isn't it? It's virtually all seed. That gives us a total availability of 13.545 billion bushels, which is almost 800 million fewer than we have this year. Okay? 800 million fewer. Now, let's go to usage. We put ethanol up to 4.75 billion bushels from 3.2, and that's according to the amount of capacity that will be in production at the end of the year, according to the Renewable Fuels Association. I pulled it right off of their website and converted that back to by 2.8 bushels of corn per gallon. Okay, that adds a 1.55 billion bushels to usage right there. I took out 500 million bushels of usage in feed and residual, which would be the amount of corn that we could supplant with the additional DDGs coming from that added ethanol production. And I reduced exports a bit. That might still be high at 2.4 billion, but there aren't very many other places in the world to go buy things to feed animals. And then we end up with 13.95 billion in usage, and that would say that 2009 year-end stocks are a negative 400 million bushels. So obviously, I'm a cockeyed optimist somewhere in there. Now, can we produce more? Well, yes, we can produce more if it rains, because we're not going to get very more acres than that. Can we use less? Well, that's going to be a tough one, especially if we keep having market hogs at the tune of 2.4 million of them a week. Okay? That's kind of difficult. Now, we are going to reduce the herd in the United States. We're going to reduce the herd in Canada even quicker. I was just up there last week with Dale, and it's not a pretty sight. You think you're hurting? Talk to somebody from Canada in this building. They've really got a tough time with the exchange rate, exaggerating everything. But something's got to give to a big tune in this equation in order for us to end up with even a half a billion bushels of carryout stocks at the end of next year. So we can't afford a hiccup. You could use calls. You could buy calls, maybe at the money or out of the money a little bit if you want to save some, to prevent a bigger wreck. That doesn't reduce the feed costs that you have now or the ones that are on the board, but it says if things go bad this spring and $6 corn is here or $7 corn is here or whatever that number might be, at least I don't have to pay that much more. Because you can still get costs somewhere in the $70 to $75 range on market hogs for the rest of the year, and lo and behold, that's kind of what the futures market's offering you. This is not a time to be aggressive, folks. It's defense time. We've played offense for a couple of 3 years. It's time to play defense with our finances. But here's the cost of those. As of yesterday's close, there's the where the futures are, and at the money calls, roughly, there's a little bit of, sometimes you can't match what that price is. There's the cost of them. And obviously there's some pretty large time value in those summer calls still. They're not cheap. It's an insurance policy. It may expire worthless. If some of you have already been in this, you may have some calls bought back lower than this that have some value now that are sure helping you. But the other alternative would be write puts in order to pay for those calls or at least reduce the cost of that insurance policy. There's obviously some challenges in that, and one of them is how big are you going to make the window. You can't buy at the money calls and sell puts because that's the same thing. Okay, you really haven't helped yourself. So you have to decide on how big a window you can stand, and then you have to be prepared to manage your put position quickly in case you get exercised on. You can't go off be planting corn this spring and not be paying attention to that. If somebody exercises on you, you may want to get out of that thing in a hurry, and you might or might not be able to, depending on what the market's doing. So there's risks in all of these. I'm trying to give you some of the few options that I can see at this point. Oil prices are the driver. Now, these oil price futures here are a little bit old. They're probably a little lower than this. I didn't see what oil did today. But still, the point of these graphs, and this is over time, starting back in March, the two lines at the top are just the most recent, is that oil prices are high and they've risen. And short of a large worldwide economic downturn, they're going to stay high. Now, are we in that this week? Well, that's hard to say at this point. It's very difficult to say. Oil futures are something we got to pay attention to. I've been making the point. I used to never have oil futures in an agricultural outlook presentation. I always do now, if we're going to talk about grains, because they're the big driver. Anything with energy in it, Joel's point about fat, has great value. And it's cost you on the diet side. It's helped you on the hog price side this last year as we've set records for byproduct values. That's really helped hog prices all of 2007. Ethanol, it's profitable again, but for how long? If corn goes up, especially if we see oil prices coming back. This got This graph comes from Iowa State University, and the top of the buff-colored area here would be the ethanol price. The buff-colored area is the amount of dollars it takes for energy to make ethanol, natural gas, coal, whatever that might be. They use natural gas to determine that. The maroon color is the cost of the corn, and the blue is a gross margin after energy and corn costs. Out of that has to come transportation, labor, payments on the plant, anything else you have to pay for in an ethanol plant. And it got very low in August. As a matter of fact, we had a number of plants operating in the red. Some older plants closed. We had at least one and I think two plants that were under construction that said, we're going to put this on hold. Now, they weren't out of the ground yet, I don't think, in any case. But still, it got tough back there. It's gotten quite a bit better over the last few months. The question is, how long can they stay in it if oil prices come down and corn prices go up? And the answer is, well, from a profitability standpoint, some of them are not going to be able to make it. But we have this thing called a mandate. Millie, what is the mandate for this year? 12 billion? 12 billion gallons of ethanol? And technically, unless someone in Washington sets it aside, which there is a mechanism to get that done, they have to use that many gallons of ethanol. So it won't matter what the price of corn is when they get to that. They just bid for it and make you bid against them and pass it along to the user of ethanol. So it's a quandary. In USDA in July, their forecast for prices, June was the little circle up at the upper left. Significantly higher than the historical relationship of ending stocks-to-use ratios and price. July and August kind of fell right along this red line here that I posit was kind of the new demand relationship the USDA was using for corn as we went through the summer. Stocks-to-use ratios in July were 13%. The forecast price was $280 to $340 for a midpoint of $310, and that's what's on that graph. Here's the one from January. Okay, starting in September, we just stepped right straight up to the October, to the December and November observations there. And of course, the changes that USDA made in January pulled that stocks-to-use ratio back smaller and increased the midpoint of the range on their price forecast to $4. And based on the futures market, that still may not be high enough. Think about what if we pull stocks-to-use ratios back to the 2006 level or 1996 level of something like 5%. There's probably some curvature in that line. It's probably not a straight line as I've drawn it here, and it could get very explosive. So, keys to prices this year. Well, the first thing is South American soybeans. I'll be the first to tell you grain analysis is not my forte. But as I watch this thing, it certainly looks to me like beans are driving the boat here. And everybody else is just trying to keep up and hope we can get some acres planted to corn. Well, good news out of South America would help a lot. They've had delayed plantings in some areas due to heavy rains. Conditions have been pretty good since then. Peter Shin reported last Friday on the Brownfield Network that his Brazilian contacts think that their crop could be 60 million tons this year, which is larger, that to be record large. That would be a good first step toward making this thing a better situation. Just who is following whom? I think corn is following beans. If we look here, though, this is world stocks-to-use, ending stocks-to-use ratios, with corn in the upper left, wheat in the upper right, beans at the lower left. It's not world bean stocks-to-use ratios that are driving things. It's U.S. ones. We're down below 6% here in the U.S., and that's really what's pushing this market up. The one that's really tight, obviously, is wheat. And again, I'm kind of optimistic that's going to take care of itself because we've got quite a few acres planted around the world. U.S. soybean stocks are very low. You can see that 5.9% stocks-to-use ratio down in the lower right-hand corner, and it's really exploded these markets. So South American soybeans could help things. U.S. corn acres could help things. The futures markets are an effort to buy those acres. 87 million, well, I haven't seen a bigger number than that forecast for this year. And even that, as you saw a while ago, I'm afraid isn't enough. Corn yields are going to be critical. And here it gets back to that point I made a while ago. Which trend do you want to choose? The green line here is a trend based on 1996 to 07 data, and it's the one that's usually used by the ethanol folks that say, don't worry, there'll be plenty here. We're going to increase these corn yields pretty rapidly. And they have a logic to that, and that is that we started using biotechnology varieties of corn in 1996. I understand that. It's logical. The trouble is that it also extrapolates from any really bad weather. And so I put together the one here that says 80 to 07. That's the red line. And you can notice that it's significantly lower for this year. And really, it has fit the last 2 years' trend yields much better than has the more recent trend line. And one that I think is probably the safer bet, and that's where I pulled my trend yield off that I used a while ago. And it's also, like I say, very close to what USDA's yield was this year. It includes 1983 and 1982, which are the last two droughts we've had, general droughts in the Corn Belt of the United States. We've had some spotty ones, but not one. We haven't had one the magnitude of 88, certainly since then. Weather goes back to that. Here's the Drought Monitor map from NOAA as of Monday. I guess that is last week, January 15th. It'd been a week ago yesterday. And we're in pretty good shape here. As a matter of fact, I think we've got very good subsoil moisture conditions. We can do very well. The caution that I would give you is what you see in the southeast. And I've heard Elwin Taylor talk a couple of times this winter, and Elwin's very concerned that the combination of dry conditions last year and carrying into this winter in the southeast, and the fact that we're about 20 years away from the last drought we have, and we tend to run 20-year cycles, he's very concerned about moisture conditions as we go through this growing year. We can't stand for anything to really have a hiccup here. Now, so $70 may be low for cost, so where are hog prices going to go? And this one has two or three things. The blue line is last year's cash hog prices, and you can see the observation from the first week of January is that little red dot over on the left. The green is CME lean hog futures as of last Friday. They're lower than that now. The black uses an Iowa, southern Minnesota basis to predict cash hog prices out through the rest of the year based off of those lean hog futures. And the orange is the monthly cost computed that I showed you a while ago from the Iowa State University estimated cost and returns prediction equation using futures as of Monday, corn and soybean meal futures. And you can see there aren't very many times that the black line gets above the orange one. Not many profits there. Now, the orange one has certainly come down the last couple of days, and that gives us a little more hope. But I can also tell you that if you come through a year like this and you can manage for small losses, that probably isn't a bad result. And maybe that's the best position you can get in at the present time. And if you can stand laying out money, especially on deferred options that have a lot of time value in them, that could be a way to manage so that you only have a lid on corn prices, maybe a floor under hog prices, and you can enjoy the positive side. Every time I start doing that with people, they always say, gee, that's costing me a lot of money up front. Yeah, it is. So does my health insurance, and I hope to never use it. The profit challenge. Now, I had to put this up here so that anybody that's been to economics school would think I'm really smart and know something about math, but I don't. What's amazing is this, is all of that gobbledygook I've got on the screen right there. You people go through this in your head all the time and solve it just like that. Some of you solve it better than others, okay? But you really do. You try to maximize profits by choosing the right amount of the X's there, the inputs, to make the right amount of the output, the quantity of hogs, and sell it at the prices that those things bring and decide what your fixed costs are. And you go through all these factors down here and you think through those all the time. You don't realize you're going through all that, but you do. It's pretty amazing. There's been some books written recently about the rationality of people and the fact that they make these economic decisions and make these calculations. The analogy is that the old man down at the local pool hall doesn't think he knows anything about physics. But if you start shooting pool with him, you'll find out he knows a lot about physics. Okay? And you folks know a lot more than you think in many cases. You have a lot of capacity for making decisions, and there are very challenging things in our marketplace right now. The thing I would encourage you to do is you've got to be steely-eyed, cold-hearted capitalist in making these decisions. It's a difficult time, but it's one that you can manage. You've done it before, and hopefully you don't have to do it again, but I'm sure you can. There are some opportunities out there. They're not necessarily good opportunities at the present time, okay? But they can be worse, and I think at this point, playing defense is a pretty important thing to be doing. Last closing remark, the sponsor of today's session is National Hog Farmer Magazine. I do write a weekly column for them. If you'd like to subscribe to that, there's the website you can go to. There are a few of you in here of our loyal readers, and we thank you for that. I also participate in a project that writes the daily letter that's sponsored by the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, and you can go to that website right there and subscribe to it. The price on these you can't beat them. They're both free. We just hope we deliver more value than it costs you.